For the wind over the Han River carries secrets that the neon lights of Seoul try to drown out. They say in the underworld there are no ghosts, only men who act like them. This is the tale of a girl named Hana, a flower blooming in a garden of concrete and shadows. She was young, her eyes filled with the light of 1,000 stars, but she lived in a cage of silk and iron. The cage belonged to a man named Daishim, the Iron Tiger of the Incheon docks. He was a man who didn't just own buildings, he owned breaths. He didn't just walk, the ground seemed to tremble beneath his Italian leather shoes. Hana was his most prized possession, a daughter of a debtor who had long since vanished. To the world, she was a princess in a high-rise palace. To Daishim, she was the only piece of beauty in his blood-stained world. But even the most beautiful bird will eventually look at the sky and wonder why its wings were made if not to fly. Hana knew that to stay was to wither, and to leave was to die. The palace was a penthouse that touched the clouds, but the windows didn't open. Every door required a code, and every hallway was guarded by men with cold eyes and hidden scars. Daishim was not a cruel man in the way of blows or shouts. His cruelty was a silent, suffocating blanket of protection. He would bring her the finest silks from Busan and the rarest jewels from Singapore, placing them around her neck like golden nooses. "The world is a monster, Hana," he would whisper, his voice like sliding gravel. "Only I can keep the monster away." But as Hana watched the tiny cars below, she realized the monster wasn't outside. It was sitting across the dinner table from her, cutting a steak with surgical precision. She began to notice the small things, the way the guards looked at their watches at exactly 3 a.m., the 3-second delay in the security camera's rotation at the north exit. She began to weave a web of her own, a silent plan born of desperation. She didn't want the silk. She wanted the dirt beneath her feet and the freedom to get lost. One rainy Tuesday, when the clouds hung low like a heavy curtain over the city, Hana found her opening. Daishim was away at a meeting in Suwon, a word that usually meant someone wasn't coming home. The main guard, a man named Min Ho, had a weakness for the spicy soup from the stall down the street. It was a small flaw, a 5-minute window where he stepped into the stairwell to eat in private. Hana didn't take her jewels, she didn't take her fine clothes. She took a burner phone she had hidden in a hollowed-out book and a pair of worn sneakers. Her heart drummed against her ribs like a trapped mouth. Thump, 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 thump. She slipped past the first camera during its blind rotation. The air in the stairwell smelled of cold concrete and old cigarettes. It was the sweetest smell she had ever known. She descended 40 flights of stairs, her legs shaking, her breath coming in shallow gasps. When she finally pushed open the heavy steel door at the bottom, the rain hit her face. It was cold, sharp, and perfect. She was out. But in the world of the Iron Tiger, out is just a larger cage. Hana ran until her lungs burned like hot coals. She didn't go to the police. The police were just Daishim's employees in different uniforms. She went to the only place she thought was safe, the crowded, chaotic labyrinth of the Namdaemun market. She blended into the crowd of grandmothers and tourists, her expensive coat hidden under a discarded plastic poncho. She found a public payphone, her hands trembling so hard she nearly dropped the coins. She dialed a number she had memorized years ago, a childhood friend named June, who had moved to the quiet countryside of Gyeongju. "June," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, he's watching me." She looked around frantically. Every man in a black suit looked like a hunter. Every shadow looked like Daishim. "I'm at the market. I need to get out of the city." On the other end, June's voice was a frantic blur of questions, but Hana couldn't listen. She felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. A black sedan had just pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting her own terrified face. The car door opened, but it wasn't Daeshim. It was his right-hand man, Kael, a man known as the Shadow. He didn't run, he didn't shout, he simply stood by the car, looking at his watch. He knew. He always knew. Hana dropped the phone, the receiver swinging back and forth like a pendulum. She dove into a narrow alleyway, knocking over a crate of dried fish. The smell was overwhelming, but she didn't stop. She crawled under a tarp, her heart screaming at her to move faster. Behind her, she heard the rhythmic click-clack of dress shoes on wet pavement. Kael was walking, not running. He was a predator who knew the prey had nowhere to go. Hama squeezed through a gap in a chain-link fence, tearing her skin, but she felt no pain. She reached the subway station, the blue line that led toward the outskirts. She jumped onto a closing train just as the doors hissed shut. As the train pulled away, she saw Kael standing on the platform. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed, as if she had failed a simple test. The train rattled and groaned, a metal beast carrying her away from the heart of the tiger's den. Hana sat in the corner, pulling the hood of her poncho low. She looked at her hands. They were stained with grease and blood. She felt a strange mixture of terror and triumph. She was moving. She was breathing air that wasn't filtered through Daeshim's ventilation system. But as the train sped through the dark tunnels, she realized a terrifying truth. Daeshim didn't just have guards, he had technology. The burner phone in her pocket vibrated. It was a text message from an unknown number. "The signal is strong, Hana. You shouldn't have taken the phone from the library." Her heart stopped. The gift she thought she had stolen, the burner phone, was a tracking device. He had let her find it. He had let her escape. He was playing a game, and she was the ball. She looked at the phone, wanting to throw it out the window, but they were in a tunnel. She was trapped with her own hunter's eyes in her pocket. She threw the phone onto the floor of the train and moved to the next carriage, her mind racing. If he was tracking the phone, he knew she was on this train. He would be waiting at the next station, or the one after that. She had to do something unexpected. As the train slowed for the Dongdaemun stop, she didn't wait for the doors to fully open. She squeezed through and ran toward the escalators. But instead of going up to the street, she ran down toward the deeper levels, the storage areas where the workers kept their tools. She found a janitor's closet and ducked inside, smelling of bleach and old mops. She waited, her breath hitched in her throat. Minutes passed, then hours. The silence was louder than the city. She realized she couldn't just run, she had to disappear. She found a pair of discarded overalls and a cap. She tied her long, beautiful hair, the hair Daeshim loved to stroke, and tucked it under the hat. She looked in a cracked mirror. Hana was gone. Now she was just a ghost in blue denim. Morning arrived with a pale, sickly light. Hana emerged from the station, walking with a limp to disguise her stride. She made it to the bus terminal, buying a ticket to a small coastal town called Sokcho. It was far from Seoul, far from the docks of Incheon. As she sat on the bus, she watched the skyscrapers fade into mountains. She thought she was safe, but every time the bus driver checked his rearview mirror, she flinched. She didn't know that back in Seoul, Daeshim was sitting in his office staring at a massive screen. A red dot was stationary at the Dongdaemun station, the phone she had dropped. But Daeshim wasn't looking at the red dot. He was looking at facial recognition software from the bus terminal, a 98% match. He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of the lips. "She's clever," he whispered to the empty room. "She's learning. But a tiger doesn't hunt by sight alone. He hunts by knowing where the prey must go to drink." Sokcho was a town of salt and scales. Hana found work at a small fish gutting shed near the docks. The work was brutal. Her hands grew raw and blistered, and the smell of fish never truly left her skin. But she loved it. For the first time in her life, the sweat on her brow was hers. She stayed in a tiny room above a noodle shop, the floorboards creaking under her feet. The owner, an old woman named Mrs. Park, didn't ask questions. She saw the fear in her eyes and offered her extra kimchi instead of conversation. For 2 weeks, Hana lived in the rhythm of the tides. She began to sleep through the night. She began to think that maybe, just maybe, the tiger had lost her scent. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea in shades of bruised purple, A black car, identical to the ones in Seoul, slowly cruised down the narrow street. It didn't stop, it just passed by, like a shark circling a reef. Hana froze, a knife halfway through a mackerel. The car was gone in seconds, but the air felt heavier. She knew that car. It wasn't a coincidence. Daishim was playing with her, letting her feel a moment of peace before snatching it away. It was his favorite way to break a spirit. She went back to her room, her heart a frantic drum. She couldn't stay here. She looked at Mrs. Park, who was humming a folk song while cleaning a table. Hana felt a pang of guilt. If she stayed, this kind woman would become collateral damage, another word Daishim used for people who got in his way. That night, Hana packed her small bag. She left a stack of crumpled gills on the table for Mrs. Park and slipped out into the misty night. She didn't go to the bus station this time. She went to the harbor. If the land belonged to the tiger, maybe the sea would be kinder. She found a fishing boat, the Blue Whale, preparing to depart for a 3-day trip. The captain was a rough man with a beard like steel wool. He needed a deckhand, and he didn't care if the hand belonged to a girl as long as she could pull a net. "Keep your head down and your mouth shut," he barked. Hana nodded, pulling her cap lower. As the boat pulled away from the dock, she looked back at the lights of Sokcho. She saw a lone figure standing under a street lamp. It was Kale. He wasn't moving. He was just watching the boat depart. He didn't try to stop her. That was the most terrifying part. They were letting her go into the open water, where there were no crowds to hide in and no alleys to run down. The sea was a desert, and she was moving into the center of it. The first night on the boat was a nightmare of salt and sickness. The waves were mountains that collapsed into valleys, and the boat groaned as if it were being torn apart. Hana spent hours retching over the side, her stomach turning to knots. But as the sun rose over the vast, empty horizon, a strange calm washed over her. There was no one here to tell her what to wear, no one to track her steps. There were only the gulls and the endless blue. She worked until her muscles screamed, pulling heavy nets filled with shimmering silver fish. The captain, seeing her grit, began to soften. "You're running from something big, aren't you?" he asked one night, sharing a tin of coffee. Hana looked at the dark water. "I'm running from a man who thinks he's a god." The captain spat into the sea. "The sea has a way of showing men they are small. Remember that, girl." On the third day, the horizon was no longer empty. A sleek white yacht appeared, cutting through the waves like a razor blade. It was too fast, too clean for these waters. The Blue Whale was a hunk of rusted iron in comparison. Hana's heart sank. She knew who was on that boat. The yacht drew closer, the hum of its powerful engines vibrating through the hull of the fishing boat. A voice boomed over a megaphone, polite but cold. "Captain of the Blue Whale, you have a passenger that belongs to Mr. Cho. Please prepare for a transfer." The captain looked at Hana, then at the yacht. He reached for a heavy iron wrench. "I don't like people telling me what's mine on my own deck," he muttered. But then 3 men appeared on the deck of the yacht, unholstering submachine guns. The captain's shoulders slumped. He was a brave man, but he wasn't a fool. Hana stood on the deck, the wind whipping her hair. She looked at the white yacht. There, standing at the railing, was Daishim. He looked perfect in a charcoal suit, a glass of dark liquid in his hand. He looked as if he were on a casual Sunday cruise, not hunting a human being in the middle of the ocean. "Hana," he called out, his voice carrying clearly over the waves. "The vacation is over. You've had your fun. You've seen the world. Now come home. It's starting to rain, and you'll catch a cold." The banality of his words was more chilling than any threat. He spoke to her like a child who had wandered too far in a park. Hana looked at the dark, churning water between the 2 boats. It looked cold. It looked final. She looked at the captain, who wouldn't meet her eyes. She was alone. The transfer was silent. 2 men from the yacht boarded the Blue Whale and took Hana by the arms. They weren't rough, but their grip was stone. They led her across a narrow gangplank. As her feet hit the plush carpet of the yacht, she felt the cage snap shut again. Daishim stepped forward, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her skin crawled. "You look terrible, Hana," he said, softly. "The sea doesn't suit you. You're a flower, not seaweed." He led her to a luxurious cabin filled with the same brand of perfume she used in Seoul. He had prepared this. He had known she would head for the coast. He had known she would take a boat. He had been one step ahead of her the entire time, watching her struggle like a fly in a web. "Why?" she whispered, staring at her reflection in a gold-rimmed mirror. "Why won't you let me go? You have everything. You have power, money, the city. Why me?" Daesham sat on the edge of the bed, his expression unreadable. "Because you are the only thing I didn't buy, Hana. I took you, yes. I kept you, yes. But I never bought your spirit. And I wanted to see if I could make you give it to me willingly. This escape, it was your last spark. I wanted to see it burn out so that when you finally sit at my side, you will do so because you know there is nowhere else in this world for you." He stood up and headed for the door. "We will be back in Seoul by morning. Wash the salt off. It smells like failure." He locked the door behind him. The yacht sped back toward Incheon. Hana sat in the dark, but she wasn't crying. She was thinking. Daesham was right. He hadn't bought her spirit. But he was wrong about one thing. The spark wasn't gone. It had just changed. It was no longer a spark of hope. It was a spark of fire. She began to look around the cabin. It was a fortress, but every fortress has a weakness. She noticed the smoke detector on the ceiling. She noticed the expensive, high-proof liquor on the sideboard. She noticed the silk curtains. She remembered what the captain said. The sea has a way of showing men they are small. She didn't need to outrun the tiger anymore. She needed to burn the jungle down. Hours later, as the lights of Incheon appeared on the horizon, a thick black smoke began to billow from the master's suite. The alarm shrieked, a piercing sound that cut through the night. The guards scrambled, shouting orders. Daesham rushed to the cabin, kicking the door open. He was met with a wall of heat and flame. Hana was standing by the window, which she had managed to shatter with a heavy bronze statue. The wind was howling into the room, fanning the fire. "Hana, get out of there!" Daesham roared, his composure finally breaking. For the first time, he looked afraid, not of the fire, but of losing his prize. Hana looked at him, her face illuminated by the orange glow. "You said the world is a monster, Daesham," she shouted over the roar of the flames. "But you forgot that monsters can be killed." She didn't jump into the fire. She jumped into the sea. The drop was 30 feet, and the water hit her like a brick wall, knocking the wind from her lungs. She sank into the darkness, the cold numbing her instantly. Above her, the yacht was a burning pyre, a bright orange star in the night. She swam away from the suction of the sinking ship, her limbs heavy as lead. She surfaced hundreds of yards away, gasping for air. She watched as the white yacht, the symbol of Daesham's untouchable power, tilted and began to slide into the depths. She saw lifeboats being lowered, saw the frantic searchlights. She dove again, swimming toward the dark silhouette of the jagged rocks near the shore. She wasn't a flower anymore. She was a survivor. The news the next morning was filled with images of the wreckage. "Business tycoon's yacht explodes off Incheon coast," the headlines screamed. They found the guards, they found Kale, but they didn't find Daesham and they didn't find Hana. To the world, they were both victims of a tragic accident. But in the underworld, the whispers were different. They said the tiger had finally met something he couldn't tame. Hana dragged herself onto a deserted beach, her clothes tattered, her body bruised. She walked until she found a small village. She didn't go to a house. She went to a shrine. She cut her hair short with a piece of sharp shell and buried her silk clothes in the sand. She took a deep breath of the morning air. It tasted of salt, ash, and something else. It tasted of nothing. For the first time, her life was a blank page. A year passed. In the city of Daegu, far from the docks and the penthouses, a young woman worked in a library. She was quiet, efficient, and never spoke of her past. She went by the name Miran. She loved the smell of old paper and the silence of the stacks. She lived in a small apartment with a single window that looked out over a park. One afternoon, a man entered the library. He was older, with silver hair and a sharp suit. He didn't look for a book. He walked straight to the desk where Miran was working. Her heart froze. Her hand went to the small knife she kept hidden under the counter. The man smiled. It wasn't Daesham. It was the lawyer who had handled her father's estate, the man she thought had betrayed her.
"He's alive, Hana," the lawyer whispered, leaning over the desk. Hana's world tilted. "The tiger doesn't die so easily. He's been looking for you. He spent millions. He's burned half of Seoul looking for the girl who burned his boat." Hana felt the old familiar coldness creeping into her bones. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice steady. The lawyer placed a small, heavy envelope on the desk. "Because he's not looking for you to bring you back. He's looking for you because he's dying. The fire, it did more than destroy the boat. He wants to give you the keys, Hana. He wants you to lead the Incheon docks. He says only someone who could beat him is worthy of succeeding him." Hana stared at the envelope. Inside were the deeds to the buildings, the codes to the accounts, and the loyalty of 1,000 men. It was everything she had run away from, offered on a silver platter. "Tell him no," she said, her voice like ice. "Tell him I am not his successor. I am not his daughter. I am nothing to him." The lawyer sighed. "He knew you would say that. He told me to tell you one more thing. The world is still a monster, Hana, and now you are the only one who knows how to cage it." The lawyer walked away, leaving the envelope on the desk. Hana looked at it for a long time. She thought of the girls like her, trapped in silk cages. She thought of the men who thought they were gods. She didn't burn the envelope, she opened it. She didn't go back to be his princess. She went back to be his reckoning. She returned to Seoul not in a black sedan, but in a simple bus. She walked into the Iron Tiger's headquarters, and the guards, seeing the fire in her eyes, stepped aside. She walked into Daesham's room. He was a shadow of himself, wrapped in bandages, breathing through a machine. He looked up and smiled. It was a ghastly, proud smile. "You came," he wheezed. Hana stood over him. "I didn't come for you," she said. "I came for the keys. I'm going to tear your world apart, Daesham. I'm going to free every bird you ever caged." Daesham closed his eyes, a single tear escaping. "Good," he whispered. "Then I have finally won. I made you just like me." But he was wrong. Hana took the empire, but she didn't keep it. She dismantled it. She turned the penthouses into shelters. She turned the docks into honest trade. She used the tiger's gold to heal the wounds he had made. And sometimes, on a rainy night in Seoul, a phone will ring in a dark office. A girl on the other end will whisper, "Please, he's watching me." And Hana, the woman who survived the fire and the sea, will pick up the phone and say, "Don't worry, I'm watching him too." The story ends here, child. Remember, a cage is still a cage, even if it's made of gold, but a heart that has truly been free can never be locked away again. Now, go to sleep. The tiger is gone, and the flower is standing guard.